Hello, everyone, and thank you for joining. I believe this to be episode 10 of Tickets with Tay. It's been an incredible journey. We've had some amazing guests tell some amazing stories, often some new faces. I love to kind of give everyone a platform in the community to tell some stories. But today we've got Fav, who I'm sure everyone is very aware of. I think you need no introduction, but Fav, do you want to introduce yourself to any new listeners?
Yeah, sure. So hi, thanks for inviting me on, Taylor. I'm Fav. I started an Instagram page, I think about 3.5 years ago, called Ticketsandslabs, sharing a collection of predominantly kind of football cards and football tickets, and kind of it's all sort of snowballed from there. And yeah, I guess, I started off as a football card collector, moved to tickets pretty soon after, and kind of feel like I've been in the ticket game ever since. Yeah.
Absolutely. I think a lot of people in the community, like we mentioned in the pre-show, have been onboarded from some of your early podcasts with regards to like card shows and stuff like that. Do you want to quickly mention what made tickets so exciting for you versus sports cards?
Yeah, yeah, sure. I mean, I think I always hark back to how cheap they used to be, compared to cards, actually. So cards, I think, especially with the players that kind of I liked, when I was discovering kind of the card collecting hobby, they were the players that I think, we sort of grew up with. So, Ronaldo, Messi, etc. But if you wanted like a card of significance related to them, then you're forking out, for a high quality example, probably tens of thousands of pounds. And for someone that's just entered the hobby, the idea of like dropping tens of thousands of pounds is quite scary.
Absolutely.
So I think I was just looking for something that was a bit more within my price range, and collecting is kind of interesting in that sense because there's no blueprint for how you have to collect. And I think for me, it was a case of I'm not actually that bothered about the image on this card. What I actually find much more interesting is something that's got a direct link to an event or a sports person. And I think it was probably after collecting cards for about 6 months that I sort of thought, well, what about this kind of ticket avenue? I'd noticed that there were a couple of collectors that probably were more in, I think, the American side of the space that were doing this already. And I thought, well, yeah, why don't I just jump in and see how it goes? And to be honest, it sort of snowballed from there. Yeah.
What did it look like back then? Because there's obviously quite a few members since that have onboarded over the past 6 months to a year. So it's kind of interesting to explain what the dynamic of the hobby looked like then compared to now. Because of course we've got quite a few shows now. We've got the Discord, which is always active. What did it look like back then?
So I mean, it's a really good question. I was part of a Discord called, was it like Sports Card Investor? And the way that I'd gotten involved in the Sports Card Investor Discord wasn't through watching videos or anything. It was from me buying a couple of cards on eBay, and basically the guys that I was buying off probably knew that I was totally clueless, and I was asking them really dumb questions at the time, like, how do I find out more about this sort of stuff? And I remember a guy, I bought like an Alphonso Davies, like Donruss card from him. It was quite a kind of basic card in the grand scheme of things. And I kind of said, well, I don't really understand why like this red press proof is rarer than the silver press proof or whatever. Kind of dumb questions. And he said, well, you should join this Sports Card Investor Discord. And actually, the soccer page within that was really fertile, about kind of, I think about 4 years ago, right in the thick of the pandemic. And that's kind of how I got involved in the space. And as I was beginning to collect more and more and see what other people were sharing, and actually at the time, there were a lot of like really eminent collectors within that space. So players like, who have got an immense amount of respect for, like, Matt Hendler, for example, who, is this huge Brazilian collector, who, was like dropping all sorts of like gems, like, Dani Alves rookies that you've never seen, Kaká rookies that you've never seen. And you'd be like, that's amazing. Like, kind of, how is this guy finding this sort of stuff? And the more kind of obsessed you'd get with it, the more you kind of think, well, actually, there's a way to get everything here.
Yeah.
I think the way that I ended up kind of going towards tickets was that in that sports card investor sort of Discord, there were channels upon channels, so it wasn't just soccer focused. There was
Mhm.
everything and people sharing anything really. And yeah, one day I got talking to a couple of guys who were like, who contacted me kind of saying, oh, I hear you collect tickets as well. And, you know, we started talking to one another like that. This is all at the sort of same time that I was kind of on a podcast with Card Hour, you know, Vincent. And, you know, at the end of that podcast, Vincent had said, I'm going to set up a Discord and, you know, we're going to see how it's going to go. And I remember kind of, I mean, you can go and listen to that
I
podcast.
have rewatched it actually because he mentioned to me the same story, and I
Yeah.
was like, it'd be really interesting to kind of see the early days of what the hobby looked like, and it was exactly as you say.
Yeah.
Kind
And
of, you were a bit wary about it, wasn't really too certain. He was
yeah,
like, "No, let's just do it. We'll see how it goes."
yeah, exactly. And to be honest, it was really strange because I was like, I never really wanted to be, you know, in the sort of position where I was kind of like an admin or a moderator of a server like that, you know. And I remember I mean, you can go back with Discord text histories quite well. So I mean, you can go back to those really early images and texts that we were kind of sending around. You can see the full history of it, and you can see that some of the really early players are still there today. So I think the people that I probably got talking to in the very early stages were people like Steve, so who's been
Yeah,
on your show, so Shellbines. He was
yeah.
one of the very earliest collectors that I remember finding at exactly the same time as I was kind of going out and looking for these kind of like early tickets of, you know, Cristiano Ronaldo or Messi. I remember we were
Mhm.
both looking for like Cristiano's debut at basically exactly the same time. And I remember like
Yeah.
it's probably in like a really old message of mine, like, you know, I think there's an Instagram post from like 4 years ago where he's like, "Oh, I'm looking for this ticket," and
I've seen that as well.
and I sent him a message, kind of like almost. I'm not sure if it was like taunting him, but kind of like saying, "Oh, by the way, I've got it."
Standoffish.
And you know, we built up like a bit of a rapport at the time. I felt like it was only us two and maybe
Yeah.
iconic football tickets. And yeah, I mean, it was a really, really different environment because there were so few, I guess, in people interested in soccer as a as a kind of, I think, area to collect in, that you were kind of just you know, going back and forth with the same guys. And I think, you know,
Yeah.
our collecting habits, it's not to me it's not a huge surprise that if you look at perhaps mine, Steve's and Stu's collections, they're not actually hugely different. They tend to be all from the same sort of era of kind of, you know,
Yeah.
pre-modern sort of style. All of us, I think, missed the hype with kind of things like the Pele World Cup tickets, for example.
Yeah.
You know, I think for us, it was kind of like that's what the early days were like. You know, it was kind of like almost we found each other almost by accident and by word of mouth, and you know, that's how it all began for me.
Absolutely. And then the Discord seems to kind of finally bring everyone together, a place to buy, sell stories, sell, connect with other people in the hobby, think about different avenues. Now we have obviously this show where people talk about different avenues with matchups or whatever it may be. But back then it was all done through the Discord. So credit to everyone that had a contribution to that. I'm sure they're probably listening now. So shout out to them for creating a platform and I guess, a foundation to an amazing hobby. And then I guess that exposure kind of led you as an authoritative figure or a leading admin in the hobby, which I guess contributed to your job at PSA. And I think that's a really exciting avenue to discuss in this podcast because it's slightly different to what you spoke about before. Do you want to firstly start by mentioning how you got that job
Yeah,
really briefly?
yeah,
And then I've got some other interesting questions about kind of how it works and grading and all these other things that people want to know about.
yeah. I'll do my very best to not like perjure myself as well. But I guess the funny thing is, so I'll probably start in a bit of an odd place, which is that I think in about uh, June of 2022, I was off work because I was on parental leave, funnily enough, for the period of 6 months, which was amazing. and I just had my son at that time, and planned it with work. I was just going to have 6 months off, and I remember at the time there were a few members, I think, in the Discord that were reporting getting big orders back that had been, I think, at PSA for an amount of time, and unfortunately, after the processing, they were just being returned, like with none of the tickets having been graded or anything.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And I think there were a couple of guys who were like, "What's going on here?" And I think a few of them had clearly sounded out. I think Nat Turner, a few of the other individuals via like the info at PSA card thing. And I guess for a few months there was this real kind of like uncertainty as to what
I
was
do
going
remember
on.
this very vividly.
Yeah, like
this era.
I think people just didn't really have a clue what was going on with soccer tickets, to be honest. And then I got out of the blue a message from Matt Fuller on Boogers, who I didn't know at the time. Saying, "Well, look," and this was, I think, in about November of 2022. He's sort of saying, like, "Look, I'm at PSA. We're wondering if you might kind of consider kind of having a chat with us, basically." And I, said at the time, I was like, "Well, look, I've been off work for 5 months, and I'd been off on parental leave. I was kind of looking forward to the World Cup. Hadn't really thought much about kind of taking up a second job, let alone anything more than just returning to the one that I had." But I kind of got talking to Matt, and then also a few other people at PSA who kind of wanted to sound me out and work out, I think, whether I guess I was competent. I met, I think, early in the new year, virtually met kind of Steve and Steve Stint and Matt Fuller. And I think they put me through my paces with a kind of test. And even I think at the time I was kind of like, I'm not sure I'm quite the right fit, because everything that I've kind of learned has been, as a collector, it's been primarily looking for items, But actually, the funny thing is, you don't realise, but like you come across so much kind of in this hobby where you suss out whether something's legit or not as you're doing it. And I guess out of that exercise, they're both, I guess I guess satisfied with the with the result of that, and that's how I ended up kind of working for PSA. So yeah, I guess that's the best part of 15 months ago now. So yeah, that's how it all started, really.
Okay, very interesting. So you were reached out by Matt, and he kind of wanted to have you on board, mentioned some interest. You weren't fully sure if that was something you would be interested in. I'm sure they convinced you in many ways to get you on board.
I think at the time, there was a lot of unknowns, right? Like, because I didn't know anything about kind of the volume of things going through at PSA, for example. I didn't know what backlog might look like. All I knew was I had a full-time job in the UK. I was currently off work at that time, but I knew I was going to go back to work. And the number of hours that I had as spare time, I suppose, was dwindling because I've got a young family. So, I sat down with my wife and kind of said, well, look, realistically, how much time, if it was full on, could I really commit to this? And we worked it out that maybe, a few days, a few evenings a week, and maybe, a day at the weekend might be possible if it was necessary. And off of the back of that, kind of, we sort of said, well, this is probably the maximum amount of time I could commit. And realistically, that's probably a commitment that I wouldn't want to do forever. It might be a commitment that kind of, I see myself doing up until the point that they might be feeling like the internal staff are upskilled, or, to the point where, they realise the ins and outs. Obviously, at that point, not really understanding how an operation as big as sort of PSA really works. So I guess that was how it began, with a lot of unknowns, because I didn't know the volumes involved. I didn't know what the expectation was necessarily. And all of that kind of, I think, there was a lot of reassurance at the start that it would be nowhere near quite as, involved as perhaps I was prepared for, which was, actually music to my ears. And, I think I was slightly worried that it would take over my life. And, it would mean that, and there have been aspects that I think have taken over my life slightly. But I think those are not perhaps what you might think. And I think, it's a different kettle of fish getting involved with a beast of this nature to
Absolutely.
what you might
Well,
think.
it is such a big company that you hear very little from. So it's interesting to kind of have this conversation with you. And I wrote up some quick fire questions that I had for you. And we can kind of pick them off and go through them each one by one. But these are kind of questions that I've had over time. And we'll start with this one. It's the not valid for entry qualifier, would you call it? Or kind of on the flip?
Yeah.
How exactly does that work? Because there's obviously tickets throughout time that might say, you need an ID. I know the World Cup 2022 says you need your hire card, which, if I'm not mistaken, is some form of visa. So do you want to clarify that for everyone listening? So potentially they're grading and they might get stung with a not valid for entry.
Yeah, I think I would say that it's still a very subjective test. So it's not an objective test that you're necessarily saying that this is what these are the criteria that you need to meet in order for a ticket to be deemed to be valid for admission, and these are what would be hallmarks of it not being valid for admission. I would say that it's very subjective. It depends on the ticket, depends on a lot of the things like the nature of the stadium. So 2022 is a great example because actually, stepping away from the standard tickets that were issued that are not commemorative in nature, one of the things that you do see a lot of are like lounge passes. Now, lounge passes will probably allow you, in the main, admission to something like a lounge within the stadium, but would they have given you the right of entry to the venue? More likely than not, no, especially if you look at the back of the passes. So, a lot of them will contain sort of terms and conditions which say something along the lines of, this isn't going to grant you access to the stadium.
Yeah.
So I think it's very much a sort of subjective test, not a objective test, because every kind of stadium in the world, every box office has its own rules on things like, what's valid for entry and what isn't. I guess we see a lot of the bigger events, so things like the World Cup. I would say it's funny. You see a lot of World Cup tickets come through, for example, especially from 2022. And there's that piece about the hire card, and my understanding of the hire card is it's almost like an entry requirement to Qatar.
Yes.
It's almost
my
like
research
a prerequisite to kind of get into the country. So it's not quite the same as, say, having a ticket that says not valid without your membership card. If you're going to like a Man United and you've got a season ticket booklet and there's the ticket within that and that says that it's only valid with your membership card, then I think you have to make some sort of acknowledgement of that on the flip, because it's not necessarily a bona fide scan on entry type ticket. So I think it very much sort of depends on a lot of factors, but I would say that the overriding thing is that I still treat it as a subjective test, not an objective one.
Yeah, so just to clarify, if it gets you in the stadium, and this is the only necessary thing you need to get into the stadium, and it's not, for example, a lounge or a VIP room, it's just to go watch the event, and that is the only thing you need, then that's fine. Yeah. There are obviously examples of the hire card, but that's kind of a visa, so that's the subjectiveness. But generally speaking, that is the rule of thumb.
Yeah, so I think what I would say for that is, like, if you think about something like F1, where you have like a plastic paddock pass, that is literally all you need. That might have like a smart card embedded within it, or a photo on the back if it's not fake. And, that is all you need for admission. So I think again, it largely depends on a number of factors like that. I think a lot of those sorts of passes that you do see at some of these events can be more associated with like the prestige of having and wearing a pass. You look like, if you're a VIP, the fact that you're wearing a VIP pass is kind of, it's a social pecking order almost, rather than a valid for admission type thing. So yeah, I think we probably examine on a case by case basis, really, what is and what isn't valid for admission, I would say.
Okay. Yeah, I think that clears things up for some other people. Me and Lucas had a conversation the other day with, I think it was the Kevin De Bruyne debut ticket, which we even
Yep.
spoke about. And we were looking at it and comparing, a PSA 4 to a PSA 2 and stuff like that. And then noticing that we saw the QR was at the bottom, and then on the next example, the QR was at the top. Now, this is obviously early days
Yep.
before you joined and potentially cleared things up and set the rules straight. But what is the general rule of thumb with regards to what position the ticket should be in? And stuff like that.
Yeah,
because it can be confusing or annoying for collectors when you want some sort of symmetry or.
Yeah, like Matt's going to kill me if I get this wrong, but I believe the way round that a ticket should be is if you have the flip at the top, then if you turn it that way, it should be writing the right way. Now, why has this ticket gone that way up as opposed to that way up? The reason for that is that kind of, if you can see, there's sort of numbering along the bottom there. Actually, this is a pretty bad example because there's also wording that's upside down. So what the intention is to get anything that kind of is visible vertically or written kind of horizontally when it's placed vertically, to get it with that orientation, so that if you're standing up like this and you read a number on it or read some text on it, it looks correct. And obviously, depending on the example that you have. So, for example, I've got Jude Bellingham's pro debut here. Obviously, if you put these two side by side, they look like they're both facing different ways. But if you're looking at kind of like the number along the bottom, it looks right to have it kind of that you can read it left to right, if that makes sense. So that is my understanding, is that is the intention with kind of flip placement. Now, I would say that a lot of those kind of rules and policies and procedures to get that right have really been, pushed and pioneered, I think, by Matt. I think a lot of the process of kind of what I think I do is right at the start of kind of like when a ticket comes in, it's, validating whether it's a 4-star pass badge, panel. Is it real or is it a fake? It's actually a long way beyond that kind of like the item is sort of sealed, and it's not sealed by it's not sealed by kind of ourselves. I think it's not.
Matt isn't there sitting there pressing it together.
I mean, and if you think about like scalable operations in general, you're not going to have one person doing absolutely every step of it, because that not only is not scalable, firstly, but secondly, it's
not efficient either.
Well, it just creates a huge single point of failure. So I guess you wouldn't do that if you were in any sort of manufacturing process where you were creating a product. So to my mind, it's kind of a it's one of those things where I think look at my own collection long before sort of I joined PSA. And I'm not sure that I always understood why some tickets were one way up or some were another. But I believe that is the intention, so that when you display it vertically, if there's any horizontal writing, it reads from left to right.
Okay, so, makes sense. That clears that up. I obviously am aware that your role isn't grading. Your role isn't to say it's a PSA 1 or a 3.
No.
But really, in your mind, what differentiates a PSA 1 and a 1.5?
God.
Because there can be some value difference.
I wish I knew. No, I mean, what I mean to say is that, like, a lot of my knowledge on how the grading works is that I think I've always thought that a 1 is, almost like a crumpled or a torn kind of item. But a 1.5 might just have a single fold in it, is kind of the way that I've sort of differentiated it in the past. Now, that's just from personal experience. A vast majority of like items that I've got that have got a 1.5, that's the extent to which I can see the like marring. It's just a single fold will usually be it. Now, I can't say that is how the graders grade, because I'm not a grader.
Yeah.
But what I'm saying is, again, it's very kind of subjective from my perspective. Is that from what I've seen and what I'm saying I have seen are examples that I kind of have in front of me. Like this ticket, for example, which I think is Cristiano Ronaldo's third professional goal.
I believe so, yeah.
So that's a 1.5. It's a full. It looks actually pretty amazing when you're looking at it face on, but it's got a single fold like right through the middle of it, and I would imagine if it was even more scrunched up or if it had been torn, I think it'd probably be a 1. But I think a lot of the time the way that I reconcile myself with the grades is that I don't look to the number, I look to the descriptor, and the descriptor here is fair. I mean, that's a fair example. To me, it's not a good example. Maybe it is a good example, but I can understand why you might assign the condition of fair rather than poor, and I can understand why it's not necessarily good. So I usually go off of the wording rather than the number, because the number, I think and this is definitely something that I think I've seen from cards more than with tickets, is that the scale's exponential. It's not a linear scale. So, a Gem Mint 10 is very, very slightly better than a mint near mint example, or a mint 9. There's very, very tiny amount of difference really between them. And really, when you're talking about tickets, I mean, I've only ever got one PSA 10. I've submitted.
I've never. When I see one, I get very surprised, and I look through some of the data, and I believe PSA 10 is like 4.1, 4.2%. Get that? So it is
mine's
pretty
sub
difficult
1%.
to see.
Mine's sub 0.5%, I reckon. And to be honest,
it depends on the era, I guess.
It depends on the era. I also think that with tickets, you're in a slightly different ball game, because a lot of them are like low pop or pop 1. I think where it begins to matter a bit more is where it's a really, really coveted ticket, or where there's loads of them. So I guess if you're thinking about, I mean, we both talked about it, and we've talked about it in sort of previous. I've heard you talk about it in previous sort of podcasts. So the Messi Pro debut is a great example of this. Really, if you know that there is a 6 in the pop report, which there is, would you go for a grade that's going to be lower than the 6 if you know that ultimately yours is always going to be like not the highest in the pop, if that makes sense? So, and it might be that it comes back a 4 or 5. Like visually, it looks brilliant, but like you don't necessarily want to give away the fact that there's one higher, because it might not be anything to do with that example that you've got in front of you. So I don't know. It's a difficult one, really. I think people get. I would say I understand it, as a collector, because I've been stung by the 1.5 when I thought it was higher than a 1.5. Like one of the examples that I still scars me a little bit is my Black Power Salute ticket. It's a 1.5.
Yeah.
And it's probably the one ticket that I moan about more on the grade, because I think it's harsh. But there are mechanisms through which you can go and review that if it matters to you that much. If you think there's an error, what commonly happens with cards is you crack and resub. I guess is
that different with tickets, with them having certification numbers and seat numbers and stuff like that? How does that work with the internal process of PSA?
It's a good question, and to be honest, I don't honestly know the truth. I would say that with cards, obviously, I mean, if you look at certain sets, like and this is out there on the pop report. If you look at, I don't know, I think it's like the 2020 Chrome's sort of Sapphire F1 set. There are certain like one of ones that have been graded more than once, and you're like, well, that can't be the case because there's only one of them. So clearly, even the fact that it's going through the cycle more than once, kind of, I think it's not necessarily a thing that I think you take that sort of subjective view rather than kind of try and compare it on a pedestal against all separate examples.
I've actually never seen, or I've seen few examples of people being so frustrated with their grade that they crack it with tickets. Now that might be obviously the cost of grading, but that might also just be the fact that it's not as important as it is for sports cards. at the moment. Obviously, that could change as the hobby grows and progresses.
I would agree with that. Like I was going to say, I've got another example of a ticket here. So this is another low grade example. I'm bringing all the low grade bangers out today. So this is the PSA 2 of Didier Drogba's pro debut. So this was actually a trade that I made with Stu years and years ago. So Iconic Football Tickets gave me that. I can't remember what we exchanged, but there was something. And it's a 2. It's like a really low grade, but it's the only one graded. And I'm like, it's Didier Drogba. At the end of the day, I could send it back in. You'll probably get a 1.5 because it's got a pretty horrid crease through the middle. Maybe actually I should let sleeping dogs lie with that one and just take the 2, know that it's a one-of-a-kind piece, and that if anyone ever wanted it, they'd not be bothered by the 2 because then it's either... it's a
they have no other choice. It's
exactly. It's a put up or shut up sort of ticket, right? Like, I mean, if you want that ticket, it's a PSA 2. You can't get it in a higher grade. So yeah, maybe there's a bit of that. I think that's not to say that if it maybe it'd be worth more if it was like a PSA 10. I don't know. It's kind of a weird philosophical kind of argument that you have with yourself. It's like, yeah, but maybe it would be worth more if it was PSA 10. Yeah, but you're never going to get a PSA 10.
Exactly. The difference between a 2 and a 3 when it's a pop 1 is next to nothing in value. But when you're talking a PSA 2 and a 10, I think it does have value because it's a PSA 10. It's almost unheard of to find something in that condition.
Exactly. And you do often see these weird things, probably more in the card collecting side of the hobby, where just because something's a 1 of 1, the fact that it might have like an authentic grade or a 10 grade can sometimes make weird sort of it can almost like elevate it to a level of like must have, kind of like exceptionalness if it's got that high grade. With tickets, though, I've never really been concerned about the grade. I mean, some of the stuff that I've got is just horrible quality. I mean, I've got the KDB that we were talking about earlier this week. Mine's a 1. It's a ravaged copy here. It's got a tear there. It's got a horrible fold in it. It's got several folds across as well. Got loads of tickets like these because I kind of, for me, a lot of it's been about get the item, try and upgrade it if you can, if it's within your.
There's so few opportunities where they pop up. Exactly. When they do, you've got to just take it.
Yeah, exactly.
I think the one exception to that with grade is the authentic grade, and that only is the fact that it could have a hole in it and you would never know. It could have a pen mark on it and it will have the MK qualifier. So there's kind of some things that you can't exactly put your finger on, because if it was just a PSA 1 and it was a clean PSA 1, not a PSA 1 MK, I would rather that than an authentic, in my opinion. So I think authentic's a bit of a one to be cautious of. And I've had people message me saying, how did the Messi Pro debut only get graded authentic? It should be at least a PSA 1. And I think a lot of people don't realise that it's actually a choice rather than the worst possible grade, which is obviously not true.
Entirely agree with that. I think there's. I think a lot of it is. I think historically there's been a lot of tickets that have been graded authentic. I think because the grade didn't matter. I mean, perhaps in that sense, it's a bit more like grading photos. Because when you have like type 1 photos, they don't have a grade next to them. They're just like, yes, it's authentic, or no, it isn't. So maybe in some senses, like grading tickets is a bit more like that. And
that is changing though.
Yeah, perhaps even that's changing. I would say that I think that attitude comes from the card world, possibly, where if something's given an authentic grade, you're almost like so. I've done it with cards, where it's like authentic auto 10, and it's like, what's wrong with the card? Why haven't you got the card graded? And you instantly, perhaps if you've been used to that environment, would treat an authentic in the ticket world with perhaps the same preconception that you would with the card world. I suppose the only way that you're really ever going to combat that is if you've got it in front of you, maybe.
Absolutely, and when you're looking at a scan on an auction, it's often difficult to see that. And I think the difference between cards and tickets is the fact that tickets often has pen marks you might not see, whether it's a pencil mark that was potentially rubbed out but should obviously still be qualified, Whereas in sports cards or trading cards, that's very rarely you'd see that. So when you do see authentic in tickets, it's like, oh, it probably has a pen mark that I can't see, and it makes me a little bit anxious that if I was to crack and regrade, it would get the MK qualifier.
Yeah.
And for me, it's really annoying seeing that MK. I know for other people it's different, but I would much rather probably 2-3 grades worse without the MK.
It's a funny one. I think I don't really mind it quite so much because I think usually when you've got a mark on a ticket, it's denoting the score, and I kind of think I like that sort of like historical bit on it. I know that as a sort of collectible, if you're trying to sell it on, it's probably something to avoid because people want a clean example. In any form of kind of hobby, you're probably going to want the elite example available for the amount of money that you have. Now, I can forgive it because I guess a lot of this sort of harks back to kind of why I started collecting. It wasn't necessarily to get like the PSA 10 Messi rookie. It was to just get a Messi rookie, and even getting a Messi rookie card would probably be you're talking thousands of pounds when I started collecting. So the fact that you can get these for maybe the hundreds, maybe even less than that, even if they're in a condition that maybe sometimes isn't optimal, it's still like a huge, huge thing that I think tickets have over other collectibles. So I guess it's one of those where I understand why the MK thing is there. I don't think it's all bad though, because in some forms it can allow like a really solid entry point for someone to get on the ladder that doesn't exist in other avenues. So yeah, it's a funny one.
What I also found really funny was, of course, I did the video on rarest rookies and some of the greatest rarest rookies. I also did the counter to that and haven't actually posted it yet, but it's the most common ones. And I was going through all the pro debuts for everyone.
Yeah.
And I was finding like 7s and 8s and 9s and 10s in terms of total pop count. And that was high.
Yeah.
And that was like, a high was 10. And I was like, what? Because I've just put a 5 as like a rare one. And it made me really think, yes, there's the Cristiano Ronaldo, which I believe was like in the 60s.
Yep.
There's the Pele World Cup, which is in the 60s. There's the Messi Porto, which is in the 200s, I believe.
Yep.
But other than those 3 tickets, most pro debuts are really sub 15, which really shows how early the hobby is and how rare some of these things are.
And I would say there's a lot that are sort of bunching around that sort of like 10 to 20 level at the moment. So, I think there are a few that I have with me that are probably quite close to that, if not around that. So, I imagine like Jude Bellingham's pro debut must be pretty close now, if not over 10. Just from
I think it's at 8 at the moment, I believe.
Wow,
yeah, I believe
so still quite low actually, and that's a funny ticket because there's not that many out there, and sooner or later you're not going to be able to find one in any condition, and I think it's one of those players that arguably is going to be at the top of the game for probably another decade at least. Then you've got tickets like I guess on the international level you've got David Beckham's debut for 12 for is that the Brighton game or the
I believe the Brighton game.
I mean the thing about Beckham is like, and I've kind of said this a few times, but like if you like Beckham as like a player, I feel like to be like the moments that you can collect of him from a ticketing perspective are like just so good, like compared to what you can from a card perspective. There's so many options out there, whether it's like, the halfway line, like goal, or his debut, or the first time he donned an England shirt, or the red card against Argentina, or the redemption against Argentina, or the free kick. There's so many options that like are just not represented in any way by or not any significant way by cards. And I think for those major players, actually. I wouldn't be surprised if some of the pop counts went up. I think, you might be... You're probably not going to see that many more. I think Brighton Beckham's come out.
They are very rare. I know that there's not been a full graded. So far, there's only stubs.
Yeah.
So it is proving to be one of the rarer ones compared to, say, the halfway line or the free kick against Greece.
Exactly. And I guess, you would probably say that a lot of the trees were shaken with that particular ticket. So it's kind of, one of those where you wouldn't necessarily expect to see loads more come out, because there was such a high sale a few years ago that did get everyone checking their attics. So I kind of feel like that bit's already happened with that ticket. So yeah.
What are your thoughts on how that might affect the Messi with the pro debut coming up at Golden? How do you think that will empty the attics, as you say?
I don't know which way it will go. I kind of feel like, that Messi's in a different place now to when the last pro debut was on the open market. So, he hadn't won the World Cup. He wasn't playing in the MLS. Now, what I think you might see is a couple more drop onto the market because, there's news stories about this huge sale taking place. Therefore, every Espanyol collector or Espanyol fan is going to go and check their attics. But part of me also thinks that, do you know what? I think there've been a lot of people looking in the same rabbit hole for these tickets, and they've not turned anything up. It's difficult because I think our mutual friend Michael Horn. He said something to me about 6 months ago, which is still really true, and I still kind of think back to, not necessarily with this ticket, but ticket collecting is full of bear traps in a way, because it's like kind of, you have to be careful in a way with your money, because you never know whether you're going to pick up the next Messi Porto at like 50k. I don't think that's going to happen with this ticket because, quite simply, the mechanics are totally different. But I do have a mental kind of incapacity to go beyond a certain amount in my mind. I think I've got a threshold, and I wouldn't go above that because the ticketing space is so vast that there's always tickets that will emerge that you can spend your money on.
Absolutely, and we just mentioned there that Pop 5 is considered low and Pop 8 is considered high to some extent.
Exactly.
So, and that's a matter of 3.
Yeah.
And all it takes is one person to go find 3 tickets bundled together, which isn't uncommon.
Yeah.
Most tickets that I've bought on eBay, if I message the seller saying, do you have another? Maybe 20% of the time it's true that they do have another one. So it's not uncommon that they come in pairs or bundles of 3. So really that jump from low pop to high pop is almost always around the corner and always imminent.
Yeah, I would agree. It's I kind of I'm conflicted with Messi. I'm conflicted with Messi because I'd love one. So on the one hand, I'm like, yeah, I hope loads come out onto the market, but then on the other hand, I kind of think, well, I don't think they will. So it's sort of I can tell you what my heart thinks, and I can tell you what my head think, and they're both different. I don't think loads will come onto the market, but I would love it if they did. So yeah, I think the jury's out, and we'll have to wait and see. We will. And I think universally though, there are always tickets out in the wild. It just takes someone that knows what they're looking for to, or knows someone that has that trove to actually go out and make the connections and find them. So,
well, it's interesting you say that, because the guy that I bought mine from also graded Michael's one, the PSA 6.
Yeah.
He also graded the highlighter one, which is a PSA 1 stub.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm pretty sure he also graded another one. It might have been or something like that. So he's found 3 now of the pro debuts.
Yeah.
And that was almost like a full-time venture of him to dig it out and give it his all to find it. And he managed to get 3. And he said, truthfully, I don't think I'll ever find any more. So,
yeah,
I mean, that's as far as he's able to push the barriers. Whether anyone else has got other ways, and there is always other new ways. There's, like we say, there's, I don't know, targeted Facebook ads, or it might be news ads, or whatever it may be. There's always new ways which you can innovate and try find. But as far as he's willing to go, he said it's proving very difficult.
Yeah,
and it has a bounty on its head, as we know, literally.
yeah, exactly. Yeah, so it's a difficult one. It's a difficult one. I do hope there are more out there, selfishly, because it's still a ticket that I want. I don't think I'd be willing to pay kind of like before a big sale, if that kind of makes sense. So in a way, what I want is a really big sale so that everyone checks their attics, and then maybe in a couple of years' time, the market settles again, and you might pick up one then, even if it costs more in the kind of long term. I think I'm just quite risk averse like that, and I think that's
I mean,
always
you
been my.
mentioned your rule, didn't you? It was, what was it? Was it the £200 rule? I think it was that you used to have.
It used to be the £300 rule, so like
£300.
I never make a purchase over £300. And then it became the £500 rule, and then it became the £1,000 rule. And I think it's the £1,000 rule at the moment. So no item in my collection had a base cost of the item costing more than £1,000. So, and I like to think that that's been quite an interesting thing, because I think part of it has been, and I've discussed this with my wife like earlier this week. I kind of said, well, let's say that a ticket for £2.5 came up and I had to have it. Would you be open to me shuffling around my collection so that I could go out and spend that? And she said I wouldn't have a problem with it. The issue is it's not my wife that has the problem with it. It's me mentally. I think that has the issue with it. It's kind of like still a psychological barrier for me, because I know that £2,500, I could have one £2,500 ticket, or I could have 10 £250 tickets. And I know that all of
it's
those,
how you balance and juggle that.
exactly, and all of those £250 tickets that I can find, yes, they'll take time, but there'll be great tickets that you can get for that amount of money. And I think about the tickets that I've managed to get so far this year, and it's been an amazing year for me for collecting. The Maldini Pro debut cost about, just over £500, but then I had I think the Titanic and Shawshank Redemption tickets were about $150 each. And those are amazing tickets. They're world premieres of amazing films that will stand the test of time. So
I think they're great prices to be paying for them.
Yeah, and for me, I think that's the mental block that I've never quite gotten over, is that yes, I can go out and spend £2.5 grand, but actually I really love spending the £150 type limits.
For me, the most exciting pickups are the £2 on eBay, buy it now snipes of someone that has no idea, and it's worth £200 or something like that. For me, that brings me the most joy.
Yeah,
and with the Messi Pro debut, it wasn't one of those, unfortunately. But both are great feelings. With the Messi Pro debut, you just have to own it. It is for me the number one.
And I think I was mentally framing, if I had to spend £2.5 on a ticket, i.e., if I could find one in the wild for that price range, I think I'd go for it. Yeah, because I feel like that in the wild would probably be about what I'm ready to pay right now. Funnily enough, I've had the chance of paying around the same amount for the Maradona Argentina debut. And at the moment, I'm not ready to pull the trigger on it, funnily enough. And that's a ticket I really want. It's just, again, it comes back to that. I just don't know if it's quite right for me.
You also have the Messi Argentina debut as well, right?
Yeah, I do. So
that is a great little small subset there that you couldn't ever break.
No, that would be amazing. But then there's two tickets that you really need for it, right? You need the Pro debut and the Argentina and the Hungary kind of Argentina, because you need that that duo of the set. I mean, the funny thing even about that Argentina debut is that this is years and years ago. This goes back to the Discord as well. I remember one of the tickets I really wanted at the time was the Mbappe Pro debut, and I just couldn't find it. And then Stu found two, and I was just so annoyed about this. I'm going to have to take my mind off of this by going and hunting for a ticket that we just never see. So I set my sights on the Hungary Argentina game, the Messi game. And I basically just contacted every seller on eBay that I could that was located in Hungary and said, do you have this game? Well, I'm looking for a ticket from this game. And one guy got back to me, and I managed to get two tickets from him. And in the end, one of them went to Stu in exchange for an Mbappe Pro debut. So it worked out really well for me in that I managed to fill that gap in my collection, but also get something that we had previously thought was, just a myth in the wild. I don't have
with that Messi Argentina game, it is. I think every fall is either a photo, so the media pass, or TV, again media pass. Do you think we'll ever see a stadium ticket or a spectator ticket for
But
that,
I've got a
or
feeling that
do they exist?
So my one I think is a spectator ticket off the top of my head.
Okay, and it's a pool.
It's a full. It's not a photo or a TV ticket. I'll have to dig it
Okay,
out because I don't have it in front of me, but I'm pretty sure it's a bona fide full.
okay,
So they do exist, I think. And I'm saying this with the like caveat that I think that's the case with my one.
yeah,
I don't have it in front of me, unfortunately. So yeah, I think they're out there. The amazing thing is, so I've got a poster from that game because the guy that I bought the ticket from a few months later, he contacted me and said, "Oh look, I've got the poster from the game. Would you like it?" And I was like, "It's a bit random." But then I kind of thought,
yes,
well, actually, how many opportunities are you going to have this like really random poster from this game? And yeah, I've got it. I haven't got it framed. It's still in like a tube, but I really need to kind of fork out the same sort of money that I forked out for
yeah.
that.
I
You
was
know,
saying that would look
yeah,
very good.
yeah. So
I've
like,
got a more.
uh,
Sorry, I was going to say I've got a more personal question,
yeah,
and
yeah,
yeah, obviously
please,
you don't have to
please.
answer it, but obviously any collection, everyone that collects or every collector has some sense of buying and some sense of selling with regards to tickets. And often,
Yep.
to some extent, once you've made enough sales, a lot of the collection can be money on the house, so to say. How do you play it with regards to that? Are you willing to sell? What are your thoughts on selling? Is it only if it's the right price? Are you mainly a trades guy? Like
Yeah.
overall, what is your perspective with regards to your collection?
So I think I was talking to Michael about this, like kind of a couple of months ago, and I often talk to James, who's like mandatory master, my sports
Yeah, yeah,
compendium.
yeah.
Um, I've got a lot of time for him, and we often talk about kind of our strategy with this. My reason for collecting is that I basically want to amass like a museum worthy collection of items that have that I've got a huge personal attachment to. Now, I can't do that without having one eye to the finances, because if I did,
Yeah, of
then
course.
I'd be spending indiscriminately. So it's all about how do you weigh up the things that matter to me, which predominantly actually are in places that aren't necessarily high value. So like the Olympics, like matters a great deal to me, and I really like collecting that. And a lot of the items in that space are quite cheap. Um,
Hmm.
I would say that I also one of the things that's been ringing in my ears from a former conversation with James is about how every person should try and distill their like PC to 100 items, and or 100 like sets, and what I've
Yeah.
been finding is that like the sets are increasing, so I've got like every Jude Bellingham goal for Birmingham, and that's like 5 tickets, but I can argue that that's
I
for
tried to
one
break
set.
that set this week, didn't I?
Yeah, exactly, you did. But it's not being broken, no. Or
You should though, to make sure your collection's sub 100. I think that should be the one that gets broken.
the thing is, I've started now to like, at shows, kind of like let go of things. So in my head, a couple of months ago, I was like, oh, I want to concentrate on just getting pro debuts of players that have got over 50 caps. Now, even
Hmm.
50 caps is just like a joke, because you end up with like pro debuts like this. So, you've got like Gareth Barry's pro debut. I mean, great
That
player,
is a
but like,
great ticket, by the way.
I mean,
I
it's
think
good,
if you got the
but I mean,
if you
arguably,
go on
like,
the Premier League app and go on stats and then go like most tackles or most
yeah,
appearances or most minutes played, he's winning almost all of them.
he is, but like, do you know what I mean? Like, I mean, this is probably like a 50 quid ticket, at most.
I want
It's like,
that.
well, you could probably have that off me for 50 quid. I think that's the sort of thing that I need to slim down on, because and the other thing I was trying to do the other day was try and make a pro debut 11, and
That's a cool thing.
so I've got like. And in front of me, I've got like pretty much all of the tickets that I had in that Pro Debut 11. So I've got like Buffon in goal,
Yeah.
I've got Casillas as backup. So, like, kind of, I've got 2 amazing goalkeepers. I realised that I've only got Maldini for like my centre back, so I need more centre.
Yeah.
I've got Ashley Cole, and I've got Who is it? I've got
Well,
Carl Walker.
I think
You
you're
know,
creating a really cool series, which we could do.
yeah,
Maybe this wrapping up the end of season 1 and maybe moving into season 2 is kind of having some other guests on and get them to kind of make their starting 11,
yeah.
or even a full squad of 16, and that would be a really cool thing to do, especially if people don't collect goalkeepers, because you'd have, I don't know, John Terry in goal again.
Yeah, exactly. So you'd end up with like really random selections all over the pitch,
Yeah,
wouldn't you?
and
Yeah,
that'd be a cool idea. Maybe we'll do that.
yeah,
I'll birth it from this podcast.
yeah. I definitely think I think I need to start slimming down pieces of the collection. It's just I think funnily enough, the like more expensive stuff is the stuff that sort of stays in because I want it. I'm afraid I
Yeah.
think my daughter has just come down, so I'm going to take her back upstairs. If you give me
No
1
worries.
second.
Well, how about we wrap this? Should we wrap this up then? Because it's approaching an hour now.
Yeah.
I think it was a great conversation.
Yeah, let's do that. I've got my little daughter here, so as you can see,
There's her Tickets to Tay pro debut made.
Right, I'll catch you soon, Taylor.
No worries, Pat. Thank you
Let's
so much
speak
for your time.
soon.
It's a great episode. Take care.